Hello, Robert Falconer. So lovely to meet you in person finally. Thank
Great
you
to
for
be here.
coming. I just like to start with a little check-in, how you're doing, how you're feeling today, how things are going for you.
I'm doing okay. I'm old and cranky, but that's that's me.
Well, actually, I think you're pretty amazing for your age. You look very healthy. You've got this amazing life. You help so many people. And that's not many things people can say at 78. That it's remarkable that you have this healthy body and doing as much as you do. I think it's pretty awesome.
I'm pretty shocked too.
Yeah, well, I've studied, we both have,
Mhm.
you more than I, on what happens to people that go through the kind of trauma that you've had, that I've had, that some of my siblings have had. And it takes a toll on the body. Most of us don't live all that long unless we get the healing work we need, which is
Mhm.
what this talk is all about. So maybe to just start, I'll just mention if there's any viewers that have difficulty listening to trauma, we'll just do a few trigger warnings. Robert has had a lot of trauma growing up, a lot of childhood trauma. And if you have a tough time listening to that, you might want to pull back in 5 minutes because I would love at this point, Robert, if you just give us a little bit about your background, slightly about your education, the work that you did before getting into internal family systems and then what brought you to internal family systems and to focus more on this work.
Okay. Yeah, we should just have a trigger warning for the whole hour, hour and a half, whatever we
Sure.
do. Get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Um, I was raised in a middle class family. We went to church every Sunday, and it looked sort of okay from the outside, but I was raped and beaten throughout my childhood. So
Mm.
was my older brother. When I was 6 and he was like 8, he started abusing me too. My father abused me. He had live-in gay lovers who also abused both of us boys. Mom also abused us sexually. And my brother killed himself when we were teenagers. My
Mm.
father was murdered a few years later. And oh, both my parents were addicts, high functioning alcoholics. Mom more of a pill addict than a alkie, but she went on pretty incredible binges. So I should be dead like my brother or living in a dumpster or in prison. There's this thing that I often say, I used to say it as a joke, but it's too way too serious to be a joke. Women who are sexually abused as children go to therapy, men go to prison.
Mm. Mm.
It's way too true.
It is.
Yeah. So, and coming out of that kind of childhood, I the prognosis was not good,
Mm.
to put it in a very mild terms. And through, I think, guidance from spirit, and I've worked really, really hard. I'm actually basically, I think, a man of joy now,
Mm.
and very
Beautiful.
creative. Produced 9, 10 books now. I,
Wow.
I will I will have two out this year, which I've never done before, two in a
That's
year.
amazing.
And I have another one in press, and I've already have commitments to do two more. So I better stay healthy.
Oh, well, what a legacy you're leaving for the world. This is such an important conversation for me because I see a lot of the things going on in our world that these entities could actually be playing a part behind a lot of the insanity we see from politics to crime to the wars. And as we heal ourselves, we start to heal the wars within. It reflects out into the outside, of course. And I believe, as you, anyway, I'm so interested. This is Robert's book. I have to put a push for this. Oops, I better put it closer to me so it shows up. Sometimes that happens when you've got these
Yeah.
background filters on. But the others within us is a tome of wisdom, um, for helping people to understand how culturally, globally, these beings, these unidentified beings that they call in internal family systems, but how prevalent this is. And Robert, I'm closer to you in age. We grew up with cartoons where there was the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And that's kind of how it can be. And we sometimes think it's us where all this negativity comes from. And in some people, it is our own different parts. But in others, it's not. So maybe you could explain a little bit about IFS, parts work, and identified and UBs, and we can take it from there.
Okay. There are many, many other kinds of parts work, and I've studied many of them a great deal. Ego state therapy with Jack and Helen Watkins, Pia Melody's brand of therapy, she called it post-induction therapy, Gestalt therapy at Esalen. Those all were major influences in my life. And their psychosynthesis, voice dialogue, transactional analysis.
Mm,
IFS is just one of a series of ways of working with the mind based on the recognition that we are multiple.
mm,
If we go inside and really open our subjective inner realms, we are many people. We are not one. We're
mm,
much more like a team. We're much more like a basketball team than a tennis player in
mm,
our internal organization. And this is a good thing.
mm,
When there's a lot of trauma, it just tends to make the team doesn't work as a team. It tends to turn into all civil war. So
mhm,
the IFS model of healing is turn the Civil War into a functioning team or an orchestra or a great jazz band that can cooperate together and not most people go around this planet burning up most of their life energy fighting themselves in these internal civil wars. So
mm,
that's the ground floor. That's already enough to revolutionize Western psychotherapy. And IFS is doing that. It's ridiculously popular now. And I think because of that, there's some big problems. That's a whole nother subject. But as
mm,
you go in here and you meet these parts and you get to know all your parts and the self, which is the witness function, there are things beyond the parts.
mm,
There are things that did not come from your own personal lifetime,
mm,
that come from larger and deeper places. In Jungian language, they talk about complexes, which would equal the IFS parts. The little hurt exiles and the protective parts are protecting the exile, and this whole complex internal family. Jungians call it the complexes. Beyond that, you start moving into the archetypal realm,
mm,
which are things that are not from your own personal lifetime. The close-in archetypes are quite human in form,
mm,
the anima, the animus, all that stuff. You go farther and farther into the deeper and deeper archetypes, they are less and less human.
mm,
They get weirder and weirder. The farther into the antipodes of the mind you go, the weirder the stuff gets. And there's stuff there that is absolutely not part of your own personal lifetime history at all.
mm. How how
So,
how can you tell when you're working with the client that something may be a part of them and something may not be?
okay, that's a super important issue. You want to assume it's a part over and over and over again until it's absolutely clear it's not, because it's a terrible mistake that's really hard to recover from if you try to get something out of a person's system that's actually a part. You
Mm.
lose all the trust from all the parts. They're thinking that jerk's going to try and amputate me. I'm not going to,
Mm.
I'm not going to deal with him, you know. So that's a huge mistake. So let me back up a little bit before I answer that question. So many people just, this whole idea, they just go, oh, this is crazy. That guy's a nut, and that was my attitude. But the area of this that there's hard science behind now is what IFS calls legacy burdens.
Mm.
In the world of science, this is epigenetics.
Mm.
And there is hard laboratory science with this. For example, Rachel Yehuda, who's has over 500 peer-reviewed papers on the neurochemistry of the descendants of Holocaust survivors. Their
Mm.
cortisol chemistry is different. you know, this is really hard science. It's not like woo-woo stuff. And there's even a more important experiment, the Diaz wrestler experiment. And if it's okay, I just want to describe this
Please,
because
yes.
for hardcore rationalists, and I was in that camp, it's really hard to accept that something can be inside a person's mind that has a huge influence on them that's not from their own personal lifetime experience.
Mm.
So Diaz is a psychologist, PhD psychologist in Atlanta, Georgia. Wrestler with an R, not a W, if you're going to check my references, is a medical doctor at Harvard. And Diaz noticed that in the poor Hispanic community he grew up in, alcoholism and mental illness ran in families.
Mm.
And he wondered, could there be something more here than just behavioral transmission?
Mm.
So he designed what I think is a brilliant experiment. And he did it with rats. That's the standard of reality in our culture. If you can do it with rats, it's real. People don't count, but rats, it's real. This is our
True.
culture is so weird. Anyway, he took a male rat, just the male rat, and exposed it to this relatively pleasant chemical smell that's sort of like almond blossoms, and paired that with a shock until the male rat had a conditioned startle response to smelling that chemical.
Mm.
He took the sperm from that male rat, impregnated a female rat who had never met the male rat and never smelled that chemical. Her pups demonstrated that startle response to that chemical when they were old enough to be tested.
Yeah.
That when I was in college and high school, people said that can't happen. That's
Yeah.
impossible. It happens. And this has been replicated in all sorts of other circumstances. And what's really important about this, events can have happened to ancestors of yours that you don't know about at all.
Mm.
You as the child never even met them,
Mm.
and they can have pretty powerful influences on your emotional and behavioral life.
Mm.
That I was trained that that kind of stuff's absolutely impossible.
Mm. Mm.
Well, most of the training I received was wrong. And there's this whole science of epigenetics now
Mm.
about how things that happen to ancestors, not changing the genes, it's not natural selection, can influence who and how you are in the world in big ways,
Mm.
not just little stuff, big stuff.
Mm.
Okay, so this usually cracks open the door. People go, well, maybe my mind's not this contained little thing here, all about my own life. It's not. So there are these legacy burdens that come from your ancestors. And then there's a whole class of other things that we could call unattached burdens and guides, not from the ancestors, but they can have a huge impact on who we are and how we are.
Mm.
And that's what I've gotten really interested in. It's sort of the unwanted stepchild of
Mm.
IFS,
Mm.
because therapists started seeing this stuff and they didn't like it. It doesn't fit. It's really, you know, Dick didn't want it talked about for a long time because he thought it would be used to discredit his precious model
Mm.
because it's too weird. And it happens.
Yeah,
I want
we
to say one more thing about this, and then
please.
my undergraduate degree and a little bit of graduate work's in anthropology.
Mm,
And in that field, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about spirit possession.
mm,
And when I use that word, that phrase in IFS context, Dick goes crazy. Shut up, Bob.
mm,
He's much more polite than that, but he is not happy with me.
mm,
But I think what we can say is this, and even the most materialist scientific person, I think, would have to agree with this. Spirit possession, or whatever we're going to call it, there, let me put it this way. There is a basic biopsychological dynamic that occurs in almost every culture we have records of and every era of history. It's the one of the most widely spread spiritual cultural traits. This biopsychological dynamic can have profound effects on people's lives for good or ill. The metaphor most usually used to describe this is spirit possession. But
mm,
whatever we call it, we need to study this.
mm.
It happens everywhere and it's powerful in people.
Absolutely. And if you look at a part of you that might say, "Oh, I'm going to eat all that cake. I've got to eat that cake. I've got to have it." And then the other part that says, "You fat pig, how could you do that? You need to lose weight." That we can see these parts of ourselves. And then you can have some more cruel parts. I studied shamanism and I did Michael Harner's program, Foundation of Shamanic Studies. And so I went quite far down that because I also had childhood trauma that I was trying to heal, and I found that the direct connection with spirit was far more helpful using spirit guides and the loving capital S self than these other means. And when you start studying some of that, which is not unusual in many cultures of the world, but in our society, it's been programmed away from that. And, I was studying psychology in the 80s and 90s. Back then, most of the disorders they felt had a beginning in trauma. Now it's almost all biochemical so that pharma can sell some meds. And they've even gotten rid of repression. They say it's all false memories now. You should not be able to go to court 15, 20 years down the road and take your father or grandfather to court because it's too much. They've tried to hide this part of our life that's far more common than most people know or would want to know of childhood sexual abuse and the trauma that happens from that. You had spoken about immune disorders, autoimmune disorders, and how often those can come about with the body attacking itself um, through trauma. And Gabor Mate is a friend of mine, and he's written a lot about this. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that because one of my siblings is fighting a number of autoimmune disorders and has had a lot of trauma, and I just think that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's really sad when you say that. To me, the people I talk to, this biological broken brain, chemical imbalance model of mental illness is passe. Most of the people it's that's just wrong, gang. Let's be frank about it.
Mm.
Just wrong, and I'm sad to hear that there I thought the memory wars were over.
No, no, that's what's being taught right now. My daughter took, she's finishing her master's in counseling psych. I went back to school and took some of the same courses. Abnormal psychology, they're teaching false memories. No more, none of the Freudian, no more repression. All these things are just they're passing it over, and they spent so much time on false memories in that course. I was shocked. I was in cahoots with the prof because I just thought, my gosh, when I started talking about my abuse, it would have been devastating for me to meet someone, fortunate that didn't believe me. That happened the entire family on one side, but my immediate family, who had 20, 30, 40 years sobriety, were and had been in AA and on different healing programs, they were all behind me. And, so I got a lot of support from my immediate family. But I think this is horrendous for the new therapists that are being trained right now. I'm not talking about people who've been in the field for 20, 10, 20, 30 years. We know more, but what they're teaching in the universities right now is really big around false memories, and it's devastating.
That's appalling that that's returned once again. I was the head of a tiny, tiny, tiny nonprofit called the Institute for Trauma-Oriented Psychotherapy for more than a decade, fighting those false memory idiots back in the 90s.
Wow.
I thought in 2005, Jennifer Fried published an article in Science magazine. You don't get more reputable than that, called The Science of Childhood Sexual Abuse. And I thought that would nail the coffin shut on this bullshit about false memories.
Mm,
Uh, and it's really sad to hear that that garbage is still being taught.
mm,
Um, I'm not a fan of Freud, and I don't think it's repression. I think it's dissociation. And
mm,
that's an important distinction, but every form of trauma, every form of trauma is associated with memory disturbance.
mm,
Every single one from, and there many people characterize trauma in two forms, single event or repetitive and ongoing. And sort of ironically, repetitive trauma has more memory disturbance than single event trauma. And other things that predict memory disturbance are not having anyone to talk to about it,
mm,
having to keep it secret, all the things you would expect of childhood sexual abuse.
mhm.
So the fact that this garbage could be back up and being taught again is truly appalling.
Well, it's kind of reflective of what we're seeing on so many levels, with the mainstream media not being not telling the truth often. It's like our whole world is trying to program some of us. I say some because there's some of us that know better, that have done research, that have followed clinical trials and really looked at content. But I believe that some of that is behind big pharma wanting to sell more medication. And who knows, right? But it's not a healthy
No.
thing for our people.
No, and David Finkelhor at the University of Vermont was, I gave up following this stuff like, oh, almost 20 years ago, around 2005, because I thought the battle was over. But he was the foremost statistician about childhood sexual abuse. His statistic, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused.
Mm,
And that, the great, great evidence of this. And I think the 1 in 6, it's actually for boys, it's a lot closer to 1 in 3. I think we men just lie about it more.
mm. Yeah.
But
And I
I
think
don't,
it
I
I
don't
think
have
it
any.
may be even more than 1 in 3 as well with girls.
Yeah,
It just, when you start getting into these conversations with girls at a real open, honest level, a lot of this stuff does come out.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Now, do you find that when you're doing this healing work, that the UBs can come into you as you're doing this? I know you spoke about a session you had with a girl that really changed your life. And I would love you to describe that. But afterwards, you spoke about being really cold. And a lot of people, when they're under the influence of a UB, can feel this real coldness and actually get sick from these experiences. So I just wondered if that might have been something in that particular incident.
Okay. We're kind of jumping around all over the map, but that's okay. Straight paths are overrated. Um, Yes, if you're working with UBs, which are the energies within us that are not part of our own lifetime and that are not directly from our ancestors, the negative ones. There are also many, many positive influences, which IFS calls guides. Um, they can jump from one person to another. And that scares a lot of practitioners off from doing this work.
Mm,
And you're right, very often associated with coldness. And
mm,
that's not only just a clinical impression, that's throughout history. There seems to be this association. Uh, why don't I tell the story of that
please do, of that
first
woman.
patient?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
I was in my early 60s. I'm 70, actually 77 now. I got a few more
Oh,
months
oh,
before I'm
oh, oh, oh.
78.
Okay.
That's okay. Um, And I was known as a trauma therapist. I'd edited a series of 4 books on childhood abuse and I felt I had a pretty well-developed and satisfying way of dealing with human psychopathology in terms of trauma. And I was teaching IFS, and I was being a program assistant, and I was facilitating a group of 3 people, one of whom took the role of the therapist, the other took the role of the client. And this thing came up in this woman who I had reason to believe was not a part.
Mm,
I thought it was one of these. And the guy was getting very frustrated, who was the therapist. And I said,
mm.
"Do you mind if I take over your session for you?" And he said, "Please." He did. And what this woman was seeing was an internal critic. Now, we
Mm,
all have internal critics. It
mm.
would be in the thing you mentioned before, it would be the part that's saying, "Don't eat that, you fat pig."
Yeah.
That we all have those, and
Yeah.
they're good and they're trying to help us. But she had this internal critic that was just mean, and it didn't have any positive intention. And when she looked inside, what she saw was a bloodshot eyeball with the legs of a goat. And it was
Mm,
telling her she was a worm, she was horrible, she was disgusting, she should just die, there was nothing of value, on and on and on. I kept asking, well, what's good about telling her that? Because if it's a part, it'll say something like, well, if she gets this, then she won't go take risks.
mm,
If you keep looking, even at the suicidal parts, it's trying to protect the person in some way. There was
mhm,
nothing good. This thing just wanted to make her miserable. And so finally, the next thing to do in IFS is I just knew the barest outlines. I had said, ask this thing if it's a part of you. Just say, are you a part of me? Wouldn't answer, kept avoiding it, the question.
mm,
You wish I was. I've been here a long time, all that kind of stuff. I said, just keep asking. And then it had her say to me, well, you're supposed to be a teacher. That's a really dumb question. Don't you have anything smarter to ask? And I said, well, it may be dumb, but it's simple. Are you a part of her? And finally, this thing roared out, no, I'm not a part of her. I'm a much more glorious being, and I'm going to crush you like a worm the same way I'm going to destroy her.
mm,
That's an unattached burden. It's
mm,
not part of her system. It's just trying to cause damage. Using some very, very simple methods, I was able to get it out of her and then debriefed the group appropriately, went to the staff meeting, and I felt very cold and shaky. And I
mm,
thought, this is the weirdest, you know. And I started telling some of the other people on the staff about it, my colleagues and friends. And this one guy started teasing me, saying, "Hey, Bob, you're the Ghostbuster." And I really got mean to him. And I had to apologize later. It was like, it was not pretty.
mm,
And I also felt really cold. And I just thought, I'm going to ignore this. This is just, weird things happen. Not, goodbye. I'm just going to pretend this didn't happen. But then I started getting all these emails from her after the training about how she was seeing color and lights and could see the divine in people. And I thought, oh
mm,
no, I've triggered a manic episode. And
mm,
then she sent me an email that changed my life. She said, Bob, I didn't tell you or anyone at the training this, but when I was a young woman, I tried to kill myself many times, and I was locked up in institutions many times. Back then, when I tried to tell people about the non-human inside of me, they gave me electroshock and injected me full of drugs, horrible drugs. You're the first person to ever believe me, and you have changed my life.
Mm.
And then I went, oh, I can't ignore this, you know? And it was really, I really did not. And because it sort of got out in the IFS world that I was interested in these things and was willing to work with people who had them, I got a lot of referrals. Because most therapists, they start finding something like this, they just want to get away.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah,
we'll send those to Bob.
big spirit. Yeah.
So for in the relatively short time of some 15 years, I've seen many hundreds of people with issues like this. And I wrote that big fat book on this
Yeah.
subject. And, so that's how I became interested. I thought when I started doing this, I had my trauma oriented view here. And I thought this new stuff was it just exploded and destroyed that. But now I think, no, it doesn't do that at all. Nothing wrong with that trauma oriented way of approaching psychopathology. It's just there's a whole bigger circle.
Mm.
There's a lot more here than just that
Mm.
first part. So
Mm.
now I think it's an expansion rather than a destruction of the ways I was focusing.
Mm. Who knows how it started, but there's definitely been a program against anything too spiritual, too woo-woo in our world. And yet, as you start to traverse these deeper parts of ourselves through psychedelics or internal family systems, we integrate more, become more whole, become more happy. Could you speak a little bit about this, your psychedelic experiences and how that helped you, how you sat with some people too for quite a while and did some training around that. And I've had a lot of experiences with plant medicine and had a very deep healing experience in Peru on ayahuasca. I did a couple of weeks in a retreat that just changed my life. So I have a lot of hope for these, but also caution because they have to be approached with caution as well. So, and I love your sharing on this. I'd love to hear you share a bit on that.
Okay. I first got involved with psychedelics in 1967.
Hmm.
So I have a fair amount of experience. I've definitely had over 200 psychedelic experiences, and I probably sat with about that many people. Don't count. And I've been arrested twice over the years for this. And so I've paid some dues.
Mm.
Um, I think psychedelics were I was headed, coming out of my childhood when I went to the university, I was headed towards severe alcoholism. I was
Mm.
like a train on a track. That was where Bob was going, just like mom and dad. But psychedelics derailed that train.
Mm.
And there are times later in life where I abused alcohol, but it was never this overwhelming addictive thing that it had been. And then I think there's many, many other ways psychedelics are very, very useful. And I'm so grateful for the psychedelic renaissance.
Mm.
And there's problems. The the number one problem it needs adequate preparation, integration. The number one problem from my point of view, it's so expensive to do therapist-led psychedelic sessions.
Mm.
Ridiculously expensive. I was on the advisory board of Mind Medicine Australia for like a decade. They got psilocybin and MDMA legalized, but it's so expensive, almost nobody can do a legal session. It's like 19,000 Australian dollars.
Mm. That's
They have
crazy.
all this garbage you got to do around it. So the vast majority, 80-90% of the psychedelic experiences will be done without professionals sitting with them.
Mm.
And all the money, all the educational focus is going into this little tiny percentage that's going to be professionally led. That's
Mm.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's demented.
Yeah.
You know? So I've sort of focused on, I've been trying to provide inexpensive online trainings for just ordinary folks who want to sit with their friends doing psychedelics.
Yeah.
It sort of in the harm reduction. I think
Wonderful.
start I think psychedelics are very, very beneficial, and there are downsides. People get hurt. But
Mm.
I think, let me see, one other point I want to make. Um, Ayahuasca often can be especially dangerous because it's done usually in group settings.
Mm.
So there's less supervision, less direct supervision. So all
Mm.
sorts of things can sort of fly around and get into people.
Absolutely.
But even there, one other thing, many people doing psychedelics meet conscious agentic beings. It's not this Zen Satori kind of experience most of the time.
For
People
sure.
meet conscious agent beings, spirits, to use
Yep.
a traditional name, and they form relationships with them.
Mm.
For some researchers, this was really Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico was so freaked out by this that he quit doing research for a long time.
Wow.
But the vast majority of these beings are positive.
Mm.
Guide, teacher, wise one, elder, stuff like that are the most frequently checked descriptors. And Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins University did several very large studies, 89, 90% positive. But
Yeah.
there's still that negative stuff that gets in.
Mm.
And most people who want to get involved in this, they just want to do the sunshine, the
Mm.
positive stuff. And I think it would be really good if more therapists got involved in cleaning up the times where it didn't go so well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot to be said for that. When I was in Peru, I had done many years of healing work. I'd been journeying. I'd done a lot of forgiveness work. So I was able to just hold myself, but I had struggled with dysthemia probably from the time I was a child, just that gray rain cloud. And it just knocked it out of me. But I was able to be and feel and go deeply into everything. For a lot of people that were there, even though we were in a very expensive, well-recommended retreat center with a doctor on hand, um, there was just not the support. There was one sitter and there was 20 people. And some people, I mean, it very intense, and that can be traumatizing for some people.
Yeah.
So I think, one-on-one with a shaman or a professional that's well trained, I think is the best way to go. Although, some people would disagree with that, like some of the Shipibo tribesmen that the shaman that I worked with would probably think that the group setting is the best. But what's your opinion on that?
Well, as I was mentioning before, this cost thing, most of them are going to be done in group sessions or with just, friends sitting with friends.
Mm,
So I don't know. I don't have an absolute scale of best. I don't think there is one that applies everywhere.
mhm,
Um, I think the most important part about working with psychedelics are the preparation sessions and then the integration sessions. And actually, what goes on during the session itself, get out of the way and trust the medicine.
mm,
Mithofer, who was the head researcher for much of the MAP studies trying to get MDMA legalized, he said there's an inner healing intelligence, and we just help people access that.
mm.
I think that's a really appropriate attitude. Of course, that was something a lot of the quote scientists objected to. What do you mean there's a healer inside people? We're the experts. But
I will be putting your website and that information under this video when it goes out, but it would be great to get that information so that people have access to a course where they can sit with a friend or sit with a partner, who's struggling, because I believe there's a lot of emotional pain these days. Things are coming out more that people had no idea of. So, and it's causing a lot more anxiety, a lot more struggles, a lot more financial struggles. And so for some people, having a friend to sit with could really, really help.
Hmm.
Yeah. So have you found in this work, Bob, that it's opened your mind to greater realities or other insights that have been profound in your own life?
Definitely. And I continue to pursue those with all the energy I've got.
Mm,
And more and more, I think that deep healing does not happen without connection to spirit.
mm,
This idea that even serious psychotic experiences are product of a broken brain is just bullshit,
mm.
frankly.
Yeah.
And I want to just cite one thing that really shows this. There's a wonderful anthropologist, Tanya Luhrmann, who I believe is one of the great minds alive on our planet today. And she studies psychosis and spirituality worldwide.
Mm,
And I'm going to use her data in a way she probably would not approve of because she's very conservative and cautious about the way she says things. But one of her early studies, long time ago now, was comparing psychotic experiences in San Mateo, California, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India.
mm,
In San Mateo, we spend something on the order of 1,000 times as much money as either of those other two places. Guess who gets the worst results? We do.
mm,
Now, if that's not bad enough, we're also actively exporting our methods to these other places. And in India, it's especially grim, or I know more about what they're doing there. The government of India is actively working to shut down and discredit the traditional healing temples in the name of modernization and westernization.
mm,
We should be over there studying what they're doing.
mm.
Now,
Absolutely.
Tanya has another idea that I think is super important. I said IFS recognizes that our minds are multiple. We have a self, which is the witness function, super, but then we're made up of parts. We don't want to get rid of those. That's a good thing. We just want to help them function as a team instead of a war. And that's revolutionizing psychotherapy. Not only are we multiple, our minds are also porous. Stuff comes in from the outside and goes out all the time. And if you think about it for a few minutes, every living system is surrounded by a semi-permeable membrane. Every one. Why would our minds be any different? But
Mm,
it's sort of this built-in underlying ideological thing that our minds are citadels, as Tanya Luhrmann calls them in the West. Everything in this bony little cup up here is ours. It's private. It constitutes our identity, and nobody else gets to fool with it.
mm,
That looks really powerful, looks like a fortress, a citadel, but it's actually incredibly brittle. So
mm.
it's very weak. A lot of other people have noticed this. Siegel, what's his first name?
Daniel?
Yes, Daniel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy. He calls this the myth of the solo self.
Mm,
And he says it's so deeply built into modern Western culture, it's in our language. And we can't even think clearly about what it's like to have a permeable mind, which we
mm.
do. He
Oh,
says we have to change the language. And there are a lot of other people who recognize this. I've come to believe that this citadel model of mind, having that as the operating system inside of us, it's not just an intellectual conviction.
Mm.
That's the fundamental root cause of the epidemic of mental illness these days.
Mm.
We are permeable beings, in and part of the universe around us.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And I believe that there's been a lot of shame put in around, oh, he's a bit funny, and that wink, wink, we grew up with when there was anything that was getting in touch with spirit or hearing a voice or any kind of mystical experience. I know you've mentioned William James, who I loved. His book, Varieties of Religious Experience, was one of my first books that I was just like, oh, crazy about, because it made sense for me on some of the spiritual experiences that I have had in my life, especially as a young person, that I didn't understand. And I love how you talk about his practical application of life. If it
Yeah.
works, don't fix it. And that's
Well,
really,
yeah, he called it radical pragmatism.
mm,
And he was also a philosopher, and he said his definition of what's real is what works. If it
mm,
works, it's real. Now, that's a very different kind of ontology from most philosophical systems. And
mm,
that's been my focus in working with these things IFS calls unattached burdens. I don't want to get into all this fancy metaphysical stuff about what are these things? How could this possibly be? And it
mm,
doesn't fit. No, what works helping this person, helping the suffering human being in front of me suffer less, that's what's real to me, whatever helps them.
mm.
And that very William James kind of approach.
It's kind of the approach of the 12-step programs too, which is beautiful, and which is why it's probably the most successful, because they're getting the emotional support, opening up to a higher power of their understanding, not something that's shoved down their throats. So it's pretty beautiful. Yeah, I see this work. I've seen it become, in the last 10 years, so much more popular internal family systems because, in my opinion, it works. It works more effectively. People get relief almost instantly or instantly as they get in touch with these parts and heal these parts and integrate. So it's really beautiful. So Bob, how do you find joy? How do you create joy in your life?
Well, I find a lot of joy in things most people would find really boring. I love to do research. I'm always reading and studying. And every big question I get to something like an answer, it opens up 10 new ones.
Mm.
So it's like this endless create, oh, this is so fascinating.
Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah, so that's something. And I like writing. I do a lot of teaching now, both small group consultation and teach classes in on quite a few different platforms. And so yeah, this all that brings me joy. I really like working overseas in different cultures,
Mm.
seeing how much of this is culture bound and how much of this is more universal. And
Mm.
let's see, I've worked now in Japan, China, Korea, Pakistan,
Wow.
Mexico, Canada, several indigenous tribes here in America, all over Europe, a few other places. And I've had individual clients in many, many, many other places. I had one in New Caledonia. And I didn't even know where
Wow.
New Caledonia is. I had to get
Oh,
an atlas and go, New Caledonia, what's that? But that is especially fascinating to me. And
wow.
much of this structure of mind seems universal.
Mm. It seems to be more closed in the Western world than anywhere, which
Yeah.
yeah, this healing is so needed on our planet right now because we're seeing um strife and so many people becoming more divisional. It seems that the media is almost set on that, making people fight themselves rather than bringing us all together. And that's what this work does, it helps us to integrate all these parts. Well, I've watched all your stuff, I'd say. And I love also that you've spoken about finding joy, getting back to the joy thing in the simple things like dancing, being in the forest,
Mhm.
this kind of movement and just connection with ourselves. And I think as we start to have more spiritual experiences and connection and more integration, it's almost like a natural byproduct. The speed to which our hearts open and the tears come and these beautiful things. And for someone who's been through what you've been through, that's been amazing for me to hear about your story and where you're at. I find you such an inspiration. To speak to me a little bit about how the forgiveness process happened in your life. I just want to start with saying that there's some people that believe, you've got to forgive, that's the key. And my experience has been that it's been healing first, healing first. And in some levels, all the shamanic work I did helped me to see what happened to my abuser in their lives and go back into ancestral times and see things that a lot of people wouldn't understand. But that was also helpful. And yet, anyway, I just love to hear from yourself because you've been through so much.
Okay. Premature healing does immense amounts of damage. It's a really bad mistake. And it usually happens because other people cannot stand to hear the pain and suffering of someone who was sexually and physically abused as a child. Because it can be very, very hard to sit with an open heart with someone who's suffered in that way. So
Mm,
they say, oh, just forgive, just forgive. And
mm,
it destroys the client in many ways.
mm,
Because if you think of this parts model, there's a very young, very wounded part of that person. And you need to allow that to come up, welcome it, witness all its suffering. And if you just say, forgive, 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 you're re exiling that part. You're
mm,
burying it in a deeper sub basement of that person's psyche where it can never heal.
mm,
It will be down there and it will fester and it
mm,
will get worse and worse. So
mhm,
it's a terrible, terrible mistake. And it's really common, distressingly common, annoyingly common. What I think of forgiveness is quite different than the way most people think of it. I don't think it's Hallmark cards and pastel colors at all. And I'll tell you a story which encapsulates forgiveness for me. I used to do a lot of work with Pia Melody while she was still alive. Magnificent human being.
codependent no more, I think, because she
Yep.
did a lot in that stuff. She's great.
Yeah, love addiction, and I
Yeah.
think her lectures are better than her books. And you can get recordings of them at the Meadows
Oh,
store. The
okay.
Meadows is her big healing or
Wow.
the big healing center she worked at most of her life. Anyway, she did these things called survivors. There'd be six of us clients. I'm going to sneeze. I got allergies really bad.
Oh, sure.
If you see me going like this a lot, that's
Bless you. I've been there.
yeah. So she did these workshops called Survivors. There'd be six of us clients, her and another therapist. We'd meet for 6 days and we'd live in the same house and work all day long every day. Very intense. And I'd done several of these with her. And then at one, she said, Bob, I've known you quite a while now. I'm going to tell you your six major character defects. Don't try and make notes. We'll have this guy make notes. You just sit there and comprehend. And she went through all this. First, your arrogance, Bob. Here's how I've seen you be arrogant, and here's how it damages you.
Mm,
And she was so accurate. And I just felt like a puddle
mm,
after she'd said all this stuff. And she knew that my father had sadistically sexually abused me throughout my childhood. And then she said, I know you've worked with your anger a lot. She said at the end of going through my six worst characters, she said, now we're going to do the hard part. And I'm thinking, what the?
Oh no.
Yeah. So she said, I know you've expressed a lot of anger, but now your anger at your father has become a spear that keeps you connected to his spirit, even though he's long dead.
Mm.
So we need to break that spear. Here's how we're going to do it. You're going to put your father in that empty chair over there, his spirit, because he'd been dead for a long time. Put that in that chair over there, and you're going to tell him how much he hurt you without getting angry at him. How close do you want the chair? And I started screaming at her, F you, Pia, and, all sorts of four-letter words at the top of my lungs. Dumbest goddamn thing. She didn't budge. She just sat there and said, okay, how close do you want the chair? Totally unfazed. And I have
Oh
a very
my,
loud voice
yeah.
when I get
What a
going.
woman.
Yeah, yeah. And we put the chair at the other end of the house. And I told my father's spirit how much he hurt me without getting angry at him. And it did break some kind of energetic connection between
Mm,
me and him. In my view, that is forgiveness.
mm,
It's detaching. In
mm,
Al-Anon, they have this flyer. It's called Detach with Love.
mm,
They're talking about detaching from an active addict. The point is, that's the only way you can really detach. If you're still angry at someone, you are still attached and connected to them.
mm,
If you're still resenting someone, if you're still afraid of them, all that, you're still connected. So detach with love. It's the only way you can really detach. So that's what forgiveness is to me.
mm.
It's not anything about approval. You don't even have to say anything to the people involved. It's a very, very different kind of focus and understanding.
And don't you think there's also a part to that of self-love throughout it, like really holding ourselves and being there, this relationship with self, which this capital S self. We should talk about that a little bit in case there's people not too familiar with this work and the importance of this. You called it the witness. Explain in IFS terms what the capital S self is and how that may appear, manifest, or speak to us.
Right. Dick, when he started developing this more than 40 years ago now, at first thought it was all parts in there. But then many people would have this sort of wise, kind voice in there. And when he asked, what part of you is that? They said, oh, it's not a part like other parts, it's myself.
Mm,
So he came to realize that everybody has this and that he characterized it by 8 C's. It's curious, compassionate, clear, connected, creative, calm, a couple more.
compassionate. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
yeah. So,
caring.
and that's it is always the witness. It's always the one who's looking out at all the other parts. Now, I think he intentionally dumbs this down to make it academically acceptable. It actually should also have descriptors on it like vast, luminous, even full of wonder, awe, ecstasy. It's actually a
Absolutely.
way of sort of disguising spirit and sneaking spirit back into psychotherapy in a way that's acceptable to a world where spirit has been exiled.
Mm,
So, and the core idea of IFS is that the locus of healing is the relationship between the client's self and the client's parts. It's not the relationship between the therapist and the client.
mhm.
It's within the client. So we work a lot with facilitating that relationship and helping that open up.
And that's such a beautiful thing because as the work progresses, that person can start to become their own most loving parent and find and nurture all these different parts so that they become a more the happier person in the world. With this Citadel model of mind, it can be very lonely.
It is. The Citadel, if you, and we, almost all of us in the West, our operating system is the Citadel model of mind. Even if we intellectually think otherwise, you got to change the operating system. You just can't have a new idea. And it creates alienation. If you have that model of mind, you will feel alienated because you'll feel walled off from the rest of the world.
Mm,
And that's why I think it's the root cause of the modern epidemic of mental illness. And
mm,
there's historians who've traced it back to the Reformation, Counter-Reformation, another philosopher from Oxford who traced it back to the ancient Greeks. It has a long history, but it's really gotten bad, and it's the worst it's ever been in the modern Western world.
mm,
I want to go back to this self idea a little more.
mhm,
One of the things Dick said that was absolutely against most psychotherapy trainings, the self can never be damaged. It can't even be dirty. It's
mm,
like the sun on a stormy day. Doesn't matter how bad that storm is. Mudslides, no power, trees down, all that. When the clouds part, the sun is there, undamaged, not dirtied, not even affected. And our self is like that. That was an incredibly significant and important message for people like me with big T trauma histories.
mm,
Almost all other therapists, basically, their attitude was, you're damaged goods, expect a miserable little life, take some meds, do therapy every day for the rest of, it was
mm.
not a good message. Whereas
No,
this one is, your core spirit is not damaged at all.
I love
That's
that.
very important.
I love that. Yeah, I did an interview with Jerry Marzinsky and on his work with schizophrenics, and pretty much after 40 years of working with them, discovering that these are not hallucinations that people are going through. They are actually entities, and it seems the more traumatized a person is, the more these entities can enter. And through the shamanic work I did, we see the auric field, and where there's holes, when I would do soul retrievals or whatever, we'd follow those lines back. And I know that when you've done work with UBs, you've often seen some attachment area and these cords, that attach. And this work is so powerful for helping people to get better. The amount of trauma in our world from all these wars and the abuse and everything is really crying at this point for healing. And I just think that this is so powerful. Where do you see the world going in regards to this kind of therapy, this kind of parts work, internal family systems, potentially psychedelic healing, and where do you see it going in the future?
Okay, first, I just want to say I really admire and respect Jerry Marzinsky.
Mm,
He took a lot of grief because he stood up for what he thought was right and real.
mm,
He was doing this work, encouraging people diagnosed as psychotic to dialogue and interact with the voices they were hearing.
mm,
And he was told in one clinic that he had to quit. You can't work that way here. And he said, "Well, it works. I'm going to keep doing it." So I quit. And then he went and for I think 20 years worked in a prison for the criminally insane.
mm.
And he said, "Here, they didn't care what I did to the patients."
The
You
prison
know?
guards, yeah, we're completely
Yeah, they
different.
are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he got to work the way he thought was right and healthy. There's another guy who also worked in the same tradition of Emanuel Swedenborg earlier, Emmanuel Wilson VanDusen.
VanDusen, yeah, he's great.
Yeah. And since I wrote The Others Within Us, I also co-authored a book on Swedenborg and IFS called
Oh,
Opening the Inner Worlds. So I know something about this vast and difficult subject.
that's
And
wonderful.
I think Jerry's right.
Yeah.
These things, I don't know. It's go back to radical pragmatism.
Mm,
I don't know ultimate metaphysical realities, but
mm,
I know if we've got a person who's got voices in their head talking to them saying, kill yourself, you're an idiot, you're disgusting, die, die, die. The best way to deal with them is to start dialoguing with those voices
mm,
and treat them as if they were full spectrum people.
mm,
That works. And whether, metaphysical reality of this, doesn't matter from my point of view.
mm.
If we treat them as full spectrum people, as Jerry Marzinsky does, it works better.
That's something that I have found to be so beautiful in how you approach that, Laura Whitfield. She does this work as well, and her approach is also very compassionate in getting these UBs or these unidentified burdens to leave a person's being. The way that you've done it, I've heard you a number of times, um, sending them gently to feel the light, speaking to them with compassion, helping them to understand that they're lost. There may be the odd one that's more of an archon and really, you may not be able to um, have such ease with that. But what I had been taught is, oh boy, when they can't respond to love. They can't respond to love, and that's not true. I found
Nope.
the greatest success stories has been treating them with compassion, treating them with care. And I think
Yep.
that's where a lot of people were mistaken in the past. The way the church would do these exorcisms and just, even the way that our jail systems make people more dangerous through shaming them and not helping them to integrate all these fractured parts, creating more parts. It's sad. Um, so I really commend you with that. So speak to us a little bit about how you may help one of these UBs to leave a person.
Okay. I'm a big admirer of the Spiritists of Brazil. They've
Mm,
been doing this kind of work for 150 years or more. Uh, and they have over 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil that have Spiritist healing teams in them.
wow.
Um, and they believe that when you meet someone who has one of these external beings in them, that it becomes our job as a therapist to help that external being.
Mm,
They believe all of these external beings are lost souls from deceased humans who, for some reason or another, got stuck here or were too frightened to make the transition they needed to make.
mm,
So
mm,
the approach is always, it's compassionate, but it's like, look, you're lost, you're confused, you're in the wrong place, you're terrified. I think of it, um, have you ever had the experience of rescuing a wild animal that was trapped?
mm,
They will rip your arm off.
mm.
You know,
Yeah.
they don't know they don't know you're coming to help them. But so a lot of times working with these things is like that. It's like rescuing trapped wild animals, and
Mm,
they really want to go back to a good place.
mm,
Some of them go back to the darkness or whatever you want to call it. But once in a client, that client is no longer afraid of them and no longer has any parts who want that thing to stick around because they promise goodies like
mm,
power and, you know, they can't stay in the client. They have to go.
mm,
And I don't think, this exorcism or the uh, Protestant deliverance ministries, I don't think we need all those big fights. I
mm,
think that they can always be approached with love
mm,
and kindness and compassion.
mm. I've listened to a couple of your talks where you've done this with people and you're so compassionate. And that's really a beautiful aspect of this witness or this self, this capital S self, that the more we heal all these parts, the more we actually embody that self and become um the person that we always wanted to be, but couldn't when all that trauma was holding in on us. So I think that this is This is a revolutionary time for this kind of work. Um, and I, have been saddened by what's kind of going on now in the universities, not teaching this, not recommending it. There was a woman who had posted on social media the other day that IFS leads to creates psychosis, and I started arguing with her on it. This was on a YouTube talk. And she was going on, and I just thought, this is toxic. No, I'm going to put my two bits in. So I explained my history and the training I'd had in different psychological techniques, and that I found IFS was the most powerful, and how when we integrate these parts, we become more a whole. These psychotic parts can heal and leave. And as your work has found, as Jerry Marzinsky's has found, um, anyway, she came back and just said, "You're just dead wrong," and just silly. But I just went in the other day because I think I made that comment a month ago, a long time ago, and there's 1,000 likes on my comment. So that's just the general populace. And there was like three on her comments, with just some people that are afraid. So it shows you that it's getting out there, and
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Probably the last place that will accept this are the elites at the universities.
exactly.
Yeah, they're the worst. Yeah, and I try and stay out of that kind of stuff, but I'm glad you're doing it. Glad somebody. I had, there recently was two hit piece articles written about IFS. Really nasty, inaccurate.
Oh,
Yeah, and this, I just think it's part of it's getting so popular that now people are trying to get attention paid to them by attacking it. And I had this guy who wrote, what did he call it? Psychedelic integration. He's got like this, thing uh, on the web, and he did an interview with me that seemed very sympathetic. But then
yeah.
he wrote a hit piece article about me.
Oh
So I've
no.
had my own hit piece,
Oh dear.
and it had this very lurid cover page, and it said, "Does IFS implant belief in demons?" And this,
Oh
it
no.
was really, and then to actually read about anything I'd actually said, you had to go through a paywall.
Oh my gosh. That's
There's
terrible.
yeah, there's a lot of sleazy stuff out there. I
Yeah.
want to, I want to go in a slightly different direction.
Sure. Please.
Yeah, you're right. The world really sucks right now. And it seems that there are all these vast forces. They're like a couple tornadoes of hate. And if you don't join one and hate the other tornado, everybody hates you.
Mm.
And I think this is really sick. I
Mm.
think the whole division and mutual hatred and recrimination. And I think the thing to do is not join either. Refuse to hate. Martin Luther King said, "I will not let any man drag me down so low as to hate him."
Mm. I love that.
Nobody's living up to him anymore.
Yeah, I've been speaking out for a number of years around different things, that I felt were important. And in the last 6 months, a lot of it has been on see the big picture. Whoever they are, want us fighting each other so that we don't see other things that they may be doing or bringing in. And it's really important to nurture peace and to do what brings you peaceful and to love your neighbor. We are useless if we're fighting each other. So this is and now, I mean, in Canada where I am, it's you've got to be careful what you say. They're starting to bring in all these new laws, and anything can get flagged as hate speech, and they don't define what hate is. So, you could end up in jail one day because you like to post that somebody did that's considered hateful, and you get a knock on the door and the police are there. So, I just had a long talk with an RCMP friend of mine. Her and her husband are retired RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for people who don't know. And they're just shocked at the way the world has been going. and what's going on because it's no longer following the ethics of goodness, the ethics of truth, the ethics of love. So we have to curate that within ourselves. We have to. I'm a big meditator. I start every day meditation. I do breath work. Like you, I love to go in the forest and I love ecstatic dance and all these things keep me joyful. We have to do stuff to help that because there's so many efforts out there to take that down. And it's just a tragedy because our children deserve a peaceful world.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw this statistic recently that the UK has more people in jail for social media stuff than Russia.
Yeah, yeah. 30 people a
Real.
day arrested. 30 people a day. And we're
It's
not seeing, I saw a protest in London recently. Somebody had filmed with their own drone, millions of people out every
it
single weekend.
doesn't show
It
up on the
doesn't even
news.
show up. And a lot of people in my life that only watch the news on the TV don't believe me. I don't believe you that this is going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay. So I want to say something that's quite optimistic.
sure, please.
I think the only way it looks like the dark forces are controlling everything. They control the news media, they control the universities, they control the governments, they control many of the churches, really dark. But I'm still fundamentally optimistic. I think the only way we can change is one consciousness at a time,
Mm,
sitting with somebody else and helping them heal, or maybe, a group of six,
mm,
very, very small scale like that. And
mhm.
when you look at that compared to this domination, all these huge institutions dominated by dark forces, it seems kind of.
Yeah.
But Ian McGilchrist, who I think is another one of the great
Oh, he's
intellects
wonderful.
alive
Yeah.
today, he said, all we need to change, all we need to help is about 3% of the people on the planet. This different way of being is so contagious that if we can help 3%, it will change the world. I used to think, oh God, we need 50%, and that seemed hopeless. But 3%, that's doable, you
It's
know?
doable. It's
So
doable.
that makes me very optimistic. And it also, I just keep doing what I'm doing, trying to help the people who come to me and train a bunch of other therapists. And
Absolutely. It's like when you throw a pebble into water and the ripples go out. That's how healing happens. And as we
Mhm.
heal ourselves, instead of fighting anything, going within and sitting, a lot of the power of somatic healing is just with stopping, feeling, becoming really aware of what's going on in your body and being with it, being that witness. And it's what we're often not taught to do. Um,
Yeah,
so
trained out of us, hate somebody instead.
yeah, yeah. Wow. We could go right to 90 minutes, but I know you've got your allergies, and I am so blessed by this experience. Thank you, Bob. You are a wonderful man, and I
Oh,
believe
thank
there
you.
is truly there's hope in the world because there are people like you.
Wow, thank you.
And
Thank
I,
you.
I honestly, yeah, I thank you, and I'm gonna I'm gonna stop the recording for now. But just yeah, just I wish you peace, I wish you love, I wish you good health, and I wish you a lot of joys in your days to come. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining me. Oh,
Blessing.